Hello and welcome to episode 4 of the Real Life Podcast. I'm here today with my friend Roddy Cummins. Roddy, how are you?
I'm doing not too bad. Thanks for asking. How about you?
I'm not bad, thank you very much. I'm very excited because today we've got a topic which I'm very eager to talk about, but it's quite broad, so we've got a lot to cover.
Yes.
We are going to be discussing our top 3 horror films.
Mm-hmm.
This is in advance of films coming up such as Men, which I mentioned before, and Jordan Peele's Nope, which is being released soon. It's quite a divisive genre. Some people can't stand it, others adore it. I assume you sit on the side of enjoying it.
I hate it. I'm a big fan of
guest for this podcast.
No, I'm a big fan of certain parts of horror. I'll talk about which bits I like and do not like, I think.
Good stuff. Right. Well, I wanted to start with a little quick opener, where there's a brief discussion which I might touch on later in further podcasts. Do you think it's an overlooked genre? Because it's very rarely featured in terms of major awards, and some of the great work of history has been fundamentally horror, like Psycho and Nosferatu and things like that. Do you think people overlook it?
I think because of the 2010, like the 2010s horror, a lot of and also just the 2000, like there's been a lot of awful horror come out, definitely. Agreed. And I think because of I think films like Scary Movie as well, they've given it such a bad name, and I think it's really, really damaged. I mean, like Witch, not on my list. I think it's a phenomenal film though, and it's got loads of praise, and it's like barely got any traction. I think a lot of people outside of the horror community don't know anything about it. But I think it's definitely starting to pick up traction with, I think Ari Aster is very much spearheading it recently with the 2018 and 2019 films, Midsommar and Hereditary. I think like he's definitely helped bring that back, because that was huge. I mean, they were some of the first ones that I saw a lot of people talking about, because you had your Conjuring and Insidious kind of coming out every year or every few years. And I think it was getting a bit stale, so I think we've got a chance now of a bit of a revitalization, hopefully. I think you're spot on. I think it's because, as you say, within the noughties and the 2010s, it's sort of become shrouded in the greatest of cinema cliches, which is why things like Scary Movie actually got attention. I actually like the film Scary Movie. I know it's had negative connotations for horror, but I actually think it's really funny. But as you're saying, with stuff like the Conjuring universe, like I saw The Devil Made Me Do It, and I could predict almost every single beat of that story. And it's because they're sort of made as a quick cash in. If you look at Netflix's horror section, it's some of the most appalling films of all time. But I guess that's what makes it more satisfying when they get horror films right, which is thankfully what we're going to be talking about today. So, definitive spoiler warning, I think, on my end. I don't know about you. Yeah, you know what? I'm gonna spoil every inch of my films we're going to talk about.
Okay, well, don't anyone have a go at me. Okay, you've been firmly warned. We're going to do the same format as I did with Michael on the Nolan films. So you say your third place, and I'll say mine, and we go from there onwards and onwards. So, before we start, do you have any honourable mentions that you'd like to say?
I do. Are we going to alternate on these as well, or am I just going to plough through mine and then you plough through yours?
Why don't you plough through yours? Because I may end up overlapping, but tell me what yours are.
All right, so I have honourable mention number 1, and this is top to bottom. Paranormal Activity. I think it's a very big moment, because it's such a low budget film, and I think it spawned an awful group of films. I think the subsequent Paranormal Activity films were not that great, but I think the first one was so innovative and new and fresh and very, very scary. I think the first time you watch it, you don't really get much out of repeat viewings for me, but I think it was an awesome, very low budget film.
No, I think you're spot on. I think they remember the budget being in the thousands for that as well, which is quite rare for a horror film. But also, that was the first film I remember that genuinely made me sort of stay up at night and fear the noises that I'd heard in my house and that kind of thing. That one genuinely struck me. So that's a great show.
100%. Next, in a similar vein, I guess, is Blair Witch, the Blair Witch Project.
Yeah, classic.
Not the new one, the 1999 one.
Definitely not.
I haven't even seen the new one.
It's rubbish. Don't.
Because again, it's very low budget. It's it's genre defining, because it spawned so many found footage films and everything like that. It's so well acted. I wasn't around when it was released, but I've read so many things about how it was marketed like a genuine found footage thing, and people believed it because it is believable. What I find interesting about it, though, is it really doesn't do it for everyone. So actually, I watched it with my girlfriend, and we watched it outside the woods because I thought it'd be a scary place to watch it.
Nice, atmospheric.
Yeah, and she was not affected by it. It was my second viewing. I was very scared. I was terrified. And I think it's because you don't see, well, you never see the monster, but you don't even see a threat until, like a proper threat until the very, very end.
Yeah.
And I guess maybe for some people that really just doesn't do it. But
the idea of that lingering tension is great, isn't it? Have you actually heard the theory that there is no monster?
I have, but I don't understand what else.
So the theory is that it's a planned murder by the two guys.
Oh.
And that's why they both split up into, different places in the house in the final scene, which is, that's like, there's various stuff. But anyway, Blair Witch is a great shout, and what a great shout to watch it in the middle of the woods. That's just, it's ballsy, but I respect it.
It is ballsy. And then my final one, I've only got 3 runners up, is Get Out.
Oh, yeah.
Awesome, British lead. Great to see that. Very interesting, very compelling, very fresh. But I don't really view it as much of a horror. Yeah. I think that's why it's in the runners-up. Yeah. Because I think it's a great film for what it is. I think it leaves you kind of want to go for a shower, honestly. It's a bit like
No, I'm absolutely with you. It's one of the reasons I didn't include it in my top 3 is because I don't think it's as horror... As much of a horror film as some of the others that are out there, but despite the fact that it is probably maybe better than what's third on my list.
No, definitely, it's a great film. I just don't think it's quite a horror. Yeah, I put not a horror, more a thriller.
Great shout. No, those are 3 excellent honourable mentions. I've got no qualms with any of them. Mine are a little bit weirder. The main reason why mine are honourable mentions and not in my top 3 is because there's moments within them that I think is fantastic, but they don't lend themselves completely to being a full film. Honourable mention number 1, I mind them very quick here. I don't know if you've seen Mulholland Drive. It's a bit of a classic, but there is a scene in that where a man describes a nightmare that he has, and then the nightmare plays out directly after that, in broad daylight, beat for beat as he described it. And there is, I looked online for the names of this scene, and all I could get was the description that it is called The Magical Appearance of the Bum. So, it's scarier than that, I promise. But it's genuinely one of the most sort of spine-tingling things I've ever seen before, and it's still terrifying to me now.
The whole film, or just that scene?
Just that scene specifically. I think there's parts of the whole film that let it down in terms of structurally it goes a bit flimsy towards the end, but I think that scene is one of the great bits of horror cinema. I've got Psycho as an honourable mention as well, because structurally that's one of the greats, as well as its legacy. The second, I don't know about you, but the second I'm in the kitchen and pick up a knife, all I can think about is those strings playing in my head.
Yep, every time.
Every time. I've got The Babadook as an honourable mention because I love saying Babadook.
I say that kind of just when I'm bored. Like when I'm at work, it kind of freaks the customers out. But
I don't know if you've seen Buried with Ryan Reynolds. Is basically a film where he's buried alive. It's not really a horror film, but it's one of the films that got me really sort of stuck with me, and it's really horrible and claustrophobic. And that's an hour and a half of him being in a coffin, filling up with sand, which is great. The original Texas Chainsaw Massacre is classic horror. It's as horror as it gets. The meal scene in that makes me want to exit myself. It's awful. And The Exorcist, I very conceivably could have put it on this list. And my final honourable mention is a film which isn't a horror film. It had a certificate 12 when it was released. It's a film called Vanishing, originally called Spoorloos, because I think it's French or Dutch. But the moment at the end is the single most unnerving thing I've ever seen in a horror film. The whole film as a whole isn't it's not my favourite, but the scene at the end is definitely the scariest thing I've ever seen in a film, without a doubt.
Can you paint a picture of it? Is there a bum?
No, there's no magical bum in this one. But what there is there's a character who you are, I suppose, made to trust throughout the entirety of the film, who then does something so unspeakably evil in the context of the story that your innards start to sort of just turn, because every twist that's been taken so far in the journey feels like it's got different connotations now because of what this person does. I can't go any further than that, but if you can see it, do. It'll be 20p as a DVD on Amazon or something like that. let's get on with our top 3 then. So start me off, Roddy. What is your third favourite horror film?
Well, I'm going to preface this. I think, and this is what I was going to say from my little thing before about what genres of horror I don't like. So a lot of the like classic horror, Texas Chainsaw Massacre or like Halloween or, you know, all those classic ones, they're slashers. And I cannot deal with like hardcore slashers. Even The Babysitter, for example, which is a very fun, happy-go-lucky film, sort of, I kind of have to look away from. I'm much better with like paranormal or like a little bit of gore. But as soon as it gets into like hardcore, that none of those are on my list, even if they may be better. So on the first one, it's a low-budget film by David Robert Mitchell called It Follows.
Oh, yes.
Now, you definitely must have heard of this film.
Absolutely.
So it was, I had no idea actually it was low budget until I did some research into it, and it's 1.9 million. Obviously not crazy low budget, but it's under the 2 million threshold.
Yeah.
And that's very impressive. And I think one big reason as to why it's here is because it's the only horror film that I've watched that has made it into my nightmares. Like, genuinely, it is, and it haunted me for like weeks afterwards. Not necessarily because the film itself was particularly scary, although there's one moment that I will touch on. But I think the concept of it is so easily haunting.
Yeah.
Because it's following. It could be anyone. I mean, the concept of it just means it's a guy walking. It puts you on edge throughout the whole film, and therefore it could just put you on edge in life because it's such a normal thing.
Yeah.
And I think something very interesting, I was reading up on it, and I rewatched a bit of it, and I realized that one reason it lends itself so easily to get like infesting people's nightmares is because it's based off a recurring nightmare the director had, David Robert Mitchell had. And actually, if you rewatch it, there's a lot of dreamy stuff going on. So, I mean, people are by the pool and tanning, but it's autumn and they're also wearing autumnal clothing. And it's set in the 80s, but they have futuristic phones. Like, there's a lot of stuff that doesn't quite make sense, but it's so little that you don't act like, it's like a dream, you know, so much stuff doesn't make sense in a dream, but you just kind of go with it. So I think it's an awesome concept. There's technically a lot of, you can see a lot of metaphors with it. I mean, people have posed potential, maybe it's sexual abuse, or maybe it's transference of an STD from person to person because it's linked to sex, or, you know, there's a lot you can say to it. And I think the music from Disaster Piece is awesome. So because of the 80s setting, it's, you know, 80s synth, but it's also incredibly futuristic, and it's a awesome tension building soundtrack, and I think it's awesome from them. The one thing, and the reason it's lower down, the second half, in my opinion, really lets the film down. I think the first half is very scary. You know, they're trying to deal with it. How the hell do you deal with this seemingly impossible to fight demon that could even go invisible, as you see on the beach? And then it kind of turns into a bit of like a Scooby-Doo moment. You know, they're like trapping it by the pool, and it kind of gets all a bit, and then for some reason the guy is standing still on the roof, and it seems to break the rules. That the second half definitely, like the third act, I think lets the film down for me for the scariest bit, and I think it's one of the scariest jump scares I've ever seen.
Can I stop you?
And it's so yes.
Can I have a guess at what I think it is?
Yeah, of course.
Is it the tall man in the hallway?
It's the tall man in the hallway.
Yeah. It's
genuinely so scary. He does so little. It's just, I don't know why that's scary. And I think it's pretty universal that is a very scary moment.
Yeah.
He just walks and it's terrifying.
I think it's because it's such a sort of contrast to what might be considered a traditional jump scare in terms of the rising tension in the music, the, you know, obvious sort of physical setup in the scene, whereas this is simply, you know, the scene sort of plays that shot a couple of times before in a sort of shot reverse shot. You see it a couple of times, but it's on the sort of, I think it's maybe the third or fourth time you actually see that corridor that something actually comes down it, which means that you aren't sort of prepared for it. You're used to the shot by then, so the time it comes around completely out of nowhere with no kind of musical cue or anything, it's really sort of hits home.
100%. And I guess also, to my memory, he walks through a person, right?
He does, yes.
And so I guess that's also another thing, is this person's blocking the shot, so in your mind you're like, well, nothing's going to happen here. There's already someone occupying this space, and he just trounces on through, which is pretty rude. But no, I think that is a terrifying thing, and that's a lot of what I have to say about It Follows. I think it's a very interesting concept, and I think you can hardly tell it's that low of a budget, and I think it's very haunting.
I think you're absolutely right with so many of those things. I think the score is something I hadn't actually realised, but now the more I think about it, the more sort of twisted I feel about it. It's really sort of crunchy, which is kind of perfect for this kind of thing. It's the idea that you're talking about in terms of the second half, maybe letting the first half down. I kind of understand what you're saying, because the first half feels to me like you get sort of the inception of the idea and the realisation of what can happen. And that is the the thrillers in the chase, never in the capture, that kind of thing.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Then it's kind of, the second half gave me the problems that the whole of The Invisible Man gave me, which is, we've got something invisible here, let's see how many times we can play around with it, throwing this woman around the room. And this felt a little bit like, how many times can we try and capture someone who's just walking towards you? But I think that you're right, there's so much merit in it, and I think one of the best things about it is that in the final, you just don't know, because in the final scene, they're walking down the street hand in hand, everything's much better, but behind them there is a man who is walking down the street and looks to be coming towards them. You don't know if it's just a person walking down their neighbourhood street, or if it is the thing that is back. And I think it's one of the reasons why it's so sort of it's a bit like a brain worm, this one, because it doesn't really leave you after you've seen it. I think you're right, that's such a great way to look at it.
It's like an Inception spinning top moment.
Oh yes,
I guess.
Yes it is.
Bit of a callback.
Love an ambiguous ending. I've taken a slightly different approach to my number 3, and there's arguments to say whether it is even a horror film or not. This is why I was having really a difficult time picking between this and Get Out, because I think they sort of encompass the same genre. But my number 3 is 10 Cloverfield Lane,
right?
Directed by Dan Trachtenberg, who did the playtest episode of Black Mirror. I don't know if you've seen that one. That's a really great episode. It was written by Josh Campbell and Matt Stoichen and Damien Chazelle, as in La La Land, Whiplash, First Man, Damien Chazelle. He was originally going to direct the project, I think, but then when Whiplash got funding, he switched to that, which was probably a good decision in his in his career. But we've got Mary Elizabeth Winstead, John Goodman, John Gallagher Jr. and Bradley Cooper in it. Essentially the story is Michelle has an argument with her boyfriend Ben and leaves New Orleans behind. Ben warns her of blackouts occurring all over the country. Her car gets stuck, thrown across the road as she's travelling, and she wakes up in a concrete room, chained up. Howard comes in and explains that there's been a massive attack, either by Russians or Martians, how very American. It turns out they're in a bunker-type layer, and she finds Emmett is also housed inside, and they're told by Howard that they can't leave for 2 years due to the poisoning of the air, and as such, Michelle and Emmett don't believe him and try to escape. This is a film, kind of along with Buried, like I was talking about before, is the definition of claustrophobia. It's gained a much more emotional resonance with me because of lockdowns, I think. It's basically what a lockdown would have felt like if you were cooped up with a man who was massive and creepy. It's unsettling in kind of a really frustrating way, but I like it being frustrating, because every time you think there might be an angle for hope, it kind of lets you just believe it and then shuts it down straight away. But it doesn't feel like a horror film the same way Get Out doesn't feel like a horror film. I don't think this is better than Get Out, just to be clear, but I think in terms of horror elements, this works better if you view it as that alone. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I completely appreciate that.
Have you seen this film?
I have not. I'm looking at images currently. I'm looking at all these images of people sitting in a very, very small room. I mean, shots where in pretty much every picture I see, there's always almost all of them in the shot. I guess sort of emphasizing how close they are together in proximity all the time.
Absolutely, that's one of the things I wanted to touch on. Is there is a lot of times when it feels like the camera is set up for a wide shot, but because of the nature of the bunker, there can't be a wide shot, so it's as wide as it can be, which I think is really clever. It sort of constricts the frame and packs everything in, which is a really, brilliant way of feeling, sort of constricted and locked in. It's similar to what you were saying about It Follows. One of the great things about It Follows is that it never lets you rest, because there's this impending danger that feel like could be around any corner. This is exactly the same. It's a constant, so your heart's racing from almost the entire, 100 minutes, because it feels like Howard is never gone. What's clever is, it takes a really brilliantly twisted turn, which isn't actually that surprising based on what Howard's character is like. But the moment where it happens, we already know he's a dodgy bloke, but the moment still hits you like a train. It doesn't feel like it's coming because of the way he's been acting. There's a film, very well-known film called Misery, based on a Stephen King novel. Have you seen Misery?
I haven't, but I know the concept of Misery.
Okay, it feels like a Misery
Yeah.
version, yeah.
Yeah.
But, you know, playing a lot of the same themes, but instead of swapping the idea of a remote location, this time it's a cramped space. And it could have very easily been a remake of that with the Cloverfield type lens on it.
It's exactly like that.
Well, I think the difference between the reason why this isn't just a Misery remake is because instead of being to do with obsession, as it is with Misery, this is to do with loneliness and scary levels of self-righteousness, which I feel sort of, you know, impeding on your own kind of personal sanity and all that kind of thing. It's not Cloverfield 2, but J.J. Abrams, who produced it, said it feels like a connected film, feels like a blood relative to it. And you kind of get that with the ending of it. The reason why it's at number 3 is because of the ending. I don't actually like the way this film ends, the story of it. I think it doesn't fit. It's the same reason I don't actually like Hereditary as a film, because Hereditary for so long is just straightforward, brilliantly crafted horror that Ari Aster is brilliant at, and it's twisted and it's unnerving and it's unusual and you can't predict it. And then at the end, this is all sort of put aside in the name of lots of things that we've seen before in terms of demonic possession and all that kind of stuff. So this is kind of the same as that. This has an ending involving, spoiler, it wasn't Russians, it was aliens in this case. Yeah. Have you found your A-level text?
Yes. yeah, I have. So it's a book inspired by Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, and it's called A Handful of Dust. And near the end of this book, there is a man, and he's on a pilgrimage into like a very remote part, and he finds a man, and he's very ill. You know, he needs healing. This man in this remote location heals him up, and he's very kind to him, gives him food, gives him shelter, gives him medicine. It slowly dawns upon him that he's never leaving, and I think that's very similar to Misery in that sense. And there's that whilst he's in this, he's stuck in a house for like the whole last end of the film, reading Shakespeare to this guy, and it's horrifically unnerving. It's just that feeling of being, you know, shut in a very small space with freedom just on the outside, as it is for those characters in Cloverfield. I'm assuming, you know, they're not 100% convinced it's all irradiated and it's just above them, but they can't reach it.
That sounds like a really good comparison, to be honest, and the second time that something Heart of Darkness related has been mentioned. So but go and read Heart of Darkness, basically, because then you'll be well equipped to come back and listen to any episode of this podcast, seemingly. Okay, yeah, that's my number 3. Move on now to your second favourite horror film. Now, I heard you say, oh no, when I started mentioning Hereditary.
It's not number 2.
Okay. Okay.
But it's also not necessarily number 1. I'll explain that when I get to it, though.
Okay.
Okay. But number 2 is The Babadook, which you've already touched on. Yep. Directed by Jennifer Kent. Once again, it's technically a 3-person cast, but it's basically a 2-person cast. Who Noah Wiseman, the child actor, one of honestly the best child actors I've seen, and Essie David as the mother, who gives a phenomenal performance. I think the 2 best performances I've seen in horror are Essie David, or Essie, one of the 2, David in The Babadook, and Florence Pugh in Midsommar. I think those are 2 absolute standout performances.
Agreed.
As you said, I love saying The Babadook in restaurants. The sound design by Jed Kurzel is awesome. It does something that not many films are willing to do, and it's leave a lot of silence. It doesn't just leave silence at the scary parts. It leaves silence like almost all the way through. I mean, there's music, obviously there's a soundtrack, but it is so, all of the sounds, therefore, all of the noises in the house, all of like the glass when she's eating, like every sound is significant as a result. Yeah. And that puts you on edge for the whole thing. You hear like rustling above and you're like, is that the man in the top hat? Yeah. Is that the Babadook? What the hell is that? And it's awesome sound design. And it's the best sounding film. I obviously I love audio, so it's a big thing for me, and so I think that's a huge reason. It boosts the atmosphere to 1,000,000 because of it. Yeah. Back to the actors. I think people's gripe with this film often is that they hate Noah Wiseman. not necessarily his act, like him, but they hate the screaming
I
child.
mean, he is a bit of a screaming child.
He is a bit of a screaming child, but I think he's meant to be a screaming child
Right.
because at the beginning of the film, or like the context behind the film, you don't see this, but on the way to hospital, where the mother is about to give birth, the father's driving to the hospital, mother's going through labor, get hit in a car accident, father dies, but both the mother and the child survive. Mother and unborn baby survive. So now she's a single mother and she's living with Noah Wiseman, and he's a very, very problematic child.
Yep.
He doesn't listen to anything his mother says. He's very disobedient. He's quite violent. I mean, he pushes a girl out of a treehouse and breaks her nose. Like, he's so annoying.
Yeah.
Which is he screams a lot. But I think that perfectly adds to the film, because there's one way of looking at the Babadook, which is, I mean, there's a lot of them and that's something I'm going to touch on, but one way is that it's her grief.
Right.
It's a physical embodiment of, or not necessarily physical, but an embodiment of her grief, or maybe her anger, or her potential hatred for her son, because she's traded, in essence, her husband, who presumably she loved, to the end of the earth, for this horrifically annoying child who is making her life almost a living hell. Yeah. I mean, he is a nightmare, and I think people say some people seem to think that's a detraction from the film, but I think it perfectly adds to the narrative. Yeah. And I think he's great in his role, and I think she's great in her role. And I think a 2-person cast for as long as a film is phenomenal to make me care about the outcome as much, and to get me involved. I'm trying to think of many other that small cast films. The Lighthouse comes to mind.
The Lighthouse does come to mind, yeah.
And that's great. Apparently I haven't seen it. I need to watch it.
You'd love it. You love Robert Eggers.
I know. I do need to, I want to watch it. But anyway, I think it can go very well, and it can go awfully potentially. I mean, you can get very bored if you're not interested in the characters. I mean, it's such a risk, because if no one cares for the characters, they've got no one else to latch on to. It's just going to be a flop, and you really care for the characters. Also, it was stereotypically advertised, Conjuring film-esque. It's actually, I think it's very stereotypically shot. I think it's shot very much just like a normal horror film. I think it's nicely shot, but I don't think it's anything crazy like, for example, the cinematography in either of Ari Aster's films, which I think are very breaking the mold in the genre. It's not just spooky ghost or killer man. There's a deeper meaning to this film. I think that's cool. It's not necessarily a stereotypical horror film. There's actually a lot of layers behind it. However, I think sometimes the metaphor is far too on the nose. And I mean, that's literally shown at the end scene where it says the Babadook is a representation for, I think it was like grief or mental health grief, or something like that. I really don't like that.
No, it does feel a bit on the nose. Yeah.
And like the feeding scene at the very end, she goes down to the basement and she feeds the Babadook worms. I think that's cool, but if you follow it up with that, I think it's far, far too on the nose. I think if you'd left out the final explanation, there's so many possibilities for what the Babadook could be. The hat the Babadook is wearing is eerily similar to the hat that the son wears as a magician. So there's obvious visual similarities there, and there's so much that can be left up to interpretation. You can take away so many things, but I think I find that really, really annoying.
I think I probably agree with you about the ending. The reason why some films work so well is because what they manage to do is leave a lot of things open to interpretation or don't give you a definitive answer. I hate videos on the internet that say, this film explained. I'm like, let people read it how people want to read it. If it's the right way, cool. If it's the wrong way, whatever, it's great. You can read another film like that. The prime example for me is Paddington 2. I saw someone say that in the end of Paddington 2, he doesn't actually make it out of the cart. He dies underwater, then it's a fantasy. He's rescued by his friends. He wakes up surrounded by the Brown family in London, the place where he wants to be most. He comes downstairs and everyone he knows is standing up applauding him. He opens the door and Aunt Lucy is there, and it just feels like the most perfect impossible ending, because up until that point Aunt Lucy was in the home for retired bears. Come on. No. Now, is that really an alternative ending to the Talking Bear movie? Probably not, right? But it's just interesting that you can read it that way, and the reason the Babadook sort of lets itself down in that last moment is because it tells you this is what it's representing.
So are you telling me that the Queen's Jubilee scene with Paddington isn't real?
I mean, look,
This is horrific.
only Daniel Craig gets to film with the Queen. It's clear he's dead. He's dreaming. The way I describe the Babadook is we need to talk about Kevin with a ghost. The reason that sort of plays out is because, as you were saying, there is so much sort of trauma and difficulty surrounding her son that actually the storyline of the Babadook becomes nigh on secondary, because the whole time you are taken along with her on this ride about her difficulty in deciding, what is the best action to take with him. I think the thing you said about it being a two-person cast, really, and still making us care about both of them is true. But actually, I think the film sort of gets away with it a bit, because one of the characters is inherently intensely annoying and doesn't ever change that. So throughout the whole film, that character is there as that influence and doesn't ever really have to be anything else.
Yeah.
But I love the atmosphere it creates. I love the silence, as you were saying. That's a really great detail. The fact that loads of it is left to sort of diegetic sound in terms of stereotypical cliche musical builds and that kind of thing. I think it works really well. Okay, my number 2 then is a very, very recent film. I saw this in the cinema not many months ago. But the more I thought about it, the more I realised, in terms of the horror films that I've seen, how quickly it rose up my rankings. It's Last Night in Soho.
Yes.
Did you see Last Night in Soho?
No, I did not.
Okay. Was directed and written by Edgar Wright. Christy Wilson Cairns also helped to write it. The story is Eloise Turner moves from Cornwall to UAL in London as a fashion student, where she doesn't fit in around the other students and quickly decides she needs to abandon her university accommodation and find somewhere else to live. She finds an attic room in the house of a stern elderly lady called Mrs. Collins. After moving in, Ellie begins to have vivid dreams of being in London in the 60s, half observing and half becoming the character Sandy, who is looking for work as a singer in the Café de Paris. Sandy begins a relationship with a manager, Jack, but soon this becomes exploitative and turns incredibly sour. And in her own life, Ellie begins seeing more and more details of these dark dreams leak through until ghosts start appearing and terrorising her. Stars Thomasin McKenzie, Anya Taylor-Joy, Matt Smith, Dinah Rigg and Michael Ajao. It's trademark right, it's brilliantly done, it's fast-paced, it's unique transitions, it's interesting cuts, it's quick zooms, it's all the rest, except for this film, I think visually, in terms of mise-en-scene, it's probably the best one he's done. Have you seen the Cornetto trilogy?
By that, do you mean Shaun of the Dead?
Shaun of the Dead, Hot Fuzz and World's End.
Absolutely love them. Hot Fuzz being the best.
Excellent, right, we don't have to end this podcast then. I think the cleverest thing this film does is the way it uses lighting. Often I think lighting is something that should be background and not really forced into your face, but in this it really brings it forward, and I was worried it was going to be too much, but actually it's not. There's constant flashing of red and blue outside windows, but it's always on the outside of the windows or the outside of the scenes, as if the saviour from the police or authority or whatever siren that's going to be isn't there inside. It's still outside and it's not got in yet. The protection it's not felt. There's various uses of neon colour to make moments feel inauthentic, as if the support given by Jack the manager and others in the club is sort of synthetic and disingenuous, and that becomes reflected when Ellie in her real life enters the bar and sees the old man, and she can't truly trust the events or people she's surrounded by. She can't trust her own memories, anything like that. It feels like everything is heightened visually, which is a brilliant way to display this film, because at the core of it, it has a theme of essentially toxic masculine behaviour, and Edgar Wright said himself how he gets very worried when people give nostalgia too readily to previous decades, when obviously there was real problems afoot. So, in this sense, Sandy becomes very, very quickly from being Jack's girlfriend to him essentially pimping her out and offering her for favours with other people, and it becomes incredibly unnerving, and there's a horrible tone of sexual violence and all that, and it really turns your insides. And I think the reason this works so well in this film is because for a story that deals with such heavy issues, it manages to be sort of sufficiently unnerving without being overly grotesque in a way which feels like it's not treating the subject matter with respect. It's very cleverly told, and it's, clearly about how society uses time to diminish the toxic elements of the masculine world, as if the experiences that Sandy went through should just be brushed over and forgotten about because we're in a new age now, and that time's long ago. And anyway, those are great fun times, weren't they? Look at all the clothes and the music and all that kind of stuff. That was great. There's so many strong sequences in the film. Like, you'll know Edgar Wright is famous for his sequences, so there's a great musical sequence, which is the first dance sequence in the club, and in Shaun of the Dead, when they use Don't Stop Me Now, it feels exactly like that, except in a far more sinister way, because Jack dancing with Sandy suddenly becomes interchanged with dancing with Ellie, and Ellie's in the reflections in the scene, and it switches in and out, and it's really cleverly done, as if, it visually reinforces that in this story these two are the same, except, without telling you that they are the same. I love it. It's a great performance by Thomasin McKenzie. I think it might be Anya Taylor-Joy at her best, to be honest. This, along with Queen's Gambit, I don't think she gets better than this. Matt Smith is brilliantly sinister. It's so cleverly done. The script isn't the toe-curling mess that you often get with a horror film. I think this is something you'll agree with in stuff like The Conjuring. The script is very focused on advancing the plot, and there are a lot of characters that come in with no backstory and do stupid things. Like, there's a massive sign that says "Don't pick up Annabelle," and she opens the case and picks up Annabelle for a laugh.
Annabelle is the worst of it.
It's so frustrating, because exactly, they make so many stupid decisions, and it's all for the sake of ghosts now. This is a proper story with an emotional through line in terms of Ellie's mother and trying to make her proud and carry her passion. The central characters are really well constructed. You get a sense of their character very, very quickly, and they're developed. Also, I'm a sucker for an ambiguous ending, and it's got another one. It's another spinning top moment, and I'm loving it. But yeah, for me, this film just works brilliantly as a subtle reminder that nostalgia isn't always trustworthy.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think, going back to your point about stupid horror characters, that's another reason, I didn't say, but it's another reason why I like Get Out so much.
Yeah.
Is because he's not a stupid horror character. He does everything in his power to, as soon as shit hits the fan, as soon as stuff's slightly weird, he's getting out of there.
Absolutely.
As soon as that weird tea scene starts, he wants to get out. But if you're in the Conjuring universe, you're very excited for this tea moment. You're fully into it. You want to find out more. It really
it's different. In the Conjuring universe, the mother would tell them that she's a hypnotist, and then a group of girls would have a joke about going, "Oh no, you go and get hypnotized. No, you get hypnotized." And they go,
they'd be like, "Me."
Why don't we all get hypnotized? And there's a group hypnotizing scene, and they all walk out with no eyeballs left or something.
Exactly, and it's that's something that I wrote in my notes. I completely missed it, but I don't find movies like Conjuring and stuff like that, like traditional cliche horror movies, scary anymore.
Yes.
I've played so many horror video games. I'm a sucker for them. I love them. They're terrifying, and the reason is because you're the main character.
Absolutely, yeah.
You're experiencing that, and when you watch a film that has people doing stupid things that you wouldn't do, you're taken out of that position. You're all of a sudden like, well, there's no way I'd do that. I'm disassociating from this film.
Sure, yeah.
I'm not that scared anymore.
Let's make your own choices.
But when the guy does exactly what you do, and he's still, it's still futile, that's when it really starts getting scary.
Yeah, sure.
In my opinion, anyway. I think that's something that really pulls me out and has a big effect on me.
I tell you what, if your girlfriend wasn't moved by watching Blair Witch in the woods, sit her down with all the lights off and sit in front of Resident Evil 7, and she will just cry.
Exactly. What a scary game. Exactly. Brilliant. And it's crazy.
That brings us on to your number one film. Now, I hope I haven't ruined this.
It's Midsommar.
Yes! My God.
It actually says Midsommar / Hereditary. And I've got notes for both of them.
Right, so you've cheated, but that's
cover
no, that's fine. Fine.
I've got a lot less. No, it was meant to be just Midsommar, but there's some things of Hereditary I really love.
Okay.
Actually, I'll talk about Hereditary first and get it out of the way.
Okay, cool.
I completely agree with you. I think the lead up is awesome. I think the scene, my favorite sequence in that whole film is after her head gets smacked off by the lamppost, and it's just the shot on his face until he goes to bed.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
He's great in the film. He expresses so much emotion through so little, and it's so close to his face, and I think that is so powerful because you can see the regret, the fear of what's going to happen, then the disassociation and the like emotional numbness he feels, and it's all like he barely does anything, but you can feel it. And then that wail as the mother finds out because he's just gone up to bed, and it's still focused on him. It hasn't gone. You haven't even seen the body. You saw it for a split second, but you hear the wail as the mother finds it. You don't see it. You hear it from his perspective as it's zoomed in on him in bed. And I think that's phenomenal.
Yeah.
And I think there's so many other bits in the first, second act of the film which are awesome.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I love about both Midsommar and Hereditary is that they're very, very rewatchable. Or they're very, very, I'm going to watch the film, now I'm going to go on YouTube and check out 20 things I missed.
Yeah, sure.
Because there are so many things you missed in those films. So many little hidden details. For example, one crazy one that I don't know if you know, there's one point where the mother, she's working on a little model of the house, which is, she does dioramas.
Yes.
And there's one point where she knocks over a can of paint and it goes onto the flyer that invites her to a meeting about loss. You know, it's very coincidental. That's crazy. She goes to the meeting of loss. She meets the witch. The whole film starts to ramp up. But if you rewatch that or if you slow it down, she never touches the paint can.
Oh, I hate that.
It's actually shown that she's already being manipulated. Like the occult forces are already manipulating her at that point. You know, they've already got her in her grasp and stuff like that. You can't be expected to see that on first watch.
Yeah.
And so little rewards. I think that's really good.
Great,
but I agree. I think a lot of tropish horror stuff in the third act. It's very scary. But I think stuff like the head banging, scary running mother, it throws out a lot of the tenseness it's generated.
Yeah, for sure.
So I definitely agree. Moving on to Midsommar,
Okay,
I think one of the most haunting films I've ever seen.
Yeah.
It's a slog. It's 3 hours, or almost 3 hours. So it's intense. And I actually watched it with my, at the time, 15-year-old brother and sister and my girlfriend.
That was a clever idea.
At the end, we're all, well, me and my brother and sister are big fans of horror. We were all shocked into silence at the end. Because for anyone who doesn't know,
I think it's bedtime, siblings.
Yeah, we all packed lights on, lights off, bedtime, slept soundly. But what an ending. I'll briefly summarize the plot for anyone who doesn't know, which I'm assuming quite a lot of people do because it did very well.
Yeah, they will.
In the box office. But a group of people in their final year of university or college go to a Swedish cult to learn about the culture and sort of spend a bit of a summer away. You know, it's meant to be joyous. It's beautiful. It's midsummer. So it's the time of year where the sun doesn't set because of the geographical location. I don't know exactly why it doesn't do that, but it's a really long day and it's, you know, there's a lot of festivals. It's a very Swedish tradition and you know, it's just meant to be a happy-go-lucky thing. But as the film progresses, you see more and more strange things happen in the cult. And one by one, everyone is picked off, bar the girl. Yeah. Because of, I don't want to fully spoil it, because of some events that happened right at the beginning of the film, actually. Yeah. And there's some really powerful imagery. And it ends, I'll spoil the ending, actually.
Yeah, do it.
It ends, because that's the haunting scene. It ends with her crying, like absolutely wailing, being covered in her royal garments, her crown and her flower dress, in front of a barn that is burning, where inside is the stuffed skin of her friend, a man who has been tranquilized and put inside the skin of a bear, and I forget what happens to the third friend. But it is absolutely haunting. What happens?
The third friend, not the skin, the skin eagle?
Yes, yeah, he's blood eagled. Yeah, exactly that. He has his lungs ripped out the back of him and he's still breathing.
Which is horrible, by the way.
Yeah. And but he has little flowers in his eyes, which is nice. And I think
nice touch.
Yeah, exactly. But I think that ending, Florence Pugh does a phenomenal performance. I think you see the panic go through her eyes at the beginning of the film, in the middle of the film, at the end of the film. I mean, there's lots of moments of panic for her. She has a very rough time in the film. Yeah. It is a very, very haunting film. It also has, in my opinion, not that I would know, but the most accurate representation of shrooms in a film I've ever seen, actually. It doesn't go for the stereotypical shapes are shifting out of the sky, we're going to another world, people's eyes are getting bigger. It's really cool in that they have their feet or their hands on the floor and you see the grass going through it, and it's all these little subtle changes. I think it's a beautifully done scene. I also think it's the direct antithesis to Hereditary because, one, it's not really a jump scare horror.
No.
I definitely think it fits in horror. I mean, there's a scene where a guy's head gets caved in after he jumps off a cliff, and obviously
quite
the
funny,
ending
I'm not
scene.
gonna lie, I love that scene.
It's grim, though.
I love the doing just those people going, "What? The cliff didn't kill him? Oi, Jerry, get the mallet out. Someone got to deal with this bloke. He's made of steel."
Yeah, and then that actually something that I talked about before. The guys don't leave. The main characters don't leave at that point. Mm-hmm. Which might be because they're having a bad trip. I've seen theories that they're drugged. They can't. Their decision-making skills are impaired. Yeah. Which is definitely possible. But I think it's absolutely, there are points where it's absolutely horrific. But it's beautifully shot. It's the whole film set in daytime because it's midsummer.
Yes.
That's not a typical horror trope, and it's almost the opposite to Hereditary, especially the third act, which is almost entirely shrouded in darkness. There's so many little details you can pick up on. Like at the beginning of the film, they go past a whole tapestry. It's a very slow scroll. You think nothing of it.
It plays out and all the events of the film on the tapestry. It's brilliant.
And it's awesome. It's one of those, oh, look, that's the whole film.
They told me exactly what was going to happen, and I didn't see it.
I didn't listen. And I think it's a really well done film, and I think there's a lot of subliminal messages. It's a film about getting through grief, struggle. It's an occult film, and they're kind of inherently scary. And I think it's a definite worthy place for my number one.
I think that's absolutely fair. I love Midsommar. I think it's a brilliant film. But my favourite little detail that often isn't very, it's not very well picked up on, but there's a scene where they're trying to light a candle, and the boyfriend is trying to use the lighter, and it's not working, and it is showing that there is literally no spark between them. They have no
that's
chemistry.
Great.
It's so good. It's just a tiny detail, but it brilliantly sums up the whole reason why those two end up in the way that they do. It's got one of the most grotesquely fantastic sex scenes I've ever seen. It's so haunting. Odd in the way that it's done, but it's really haunting. I love the way that Agatha Christie is very good at doing stories where people are picked off one by one, particularly in a story called And Then There Were None. I love that story so much, and it's a sort of classic whodunit. There's 12 people on an island, they get picked off one by one until there's only one left, and this feels like it's doing that, except in a way which, because this is a world that not many people know about, and it's the twisted side of Midsommar, it feels new, and it feels inventive, and it feels like it's unpredictable, and that's really clever in the way it does it. I think the opening scene is possibly one of the most sort of unnerving things I've ever seen. It really made me properly go, oof. That's a bit of a tone. Like that's a tone setter for the whole film. To be honest,
I'd like to actually touch a bit on that scene.
Please do.
So it seems like I've watched all of these films with my girlfriend, because I watched this film with my girlfriend, and we tried to watch it once, and we
tried to watch it in a barn in a bear suit.
Yeah. We decided we'd fly to Sweden and watch it there in a field. No, but we tried to sit down and watch it.
We watched it on shrooms.
Yeah, exactly. But we were pulled away, and so we only got to see that opening scene, which, as you said, is horrific. And I'd seen sort of stuff like that before in other horror films, and I was like, yes, that's very scary. But my girlfriend, on the other hand, was very affected by it. That was on her mind until we finished the film.
Until you watched Cars.
And it is, until we watched Cars for the 15th time that week. But I also have a big problem with that scene, because it is a spinning top moment at the beginning of a film.
Yes.
But I do actually have no idea what it is. Like the Inception and the It Follows have one or two possibilities. It is or it isn't. Yeah. This I have no idea.
This is a host of things. People don't know if this is suicide, if this is carbon monoxide, if this is whatever. Yeah. It's full of them.
Yeah. There is really no way of knowing. I mean, my running theory is that it was the happy-go-lucky Swedish man.
Okay.
Who is the person who actually lures the whole group of university students there.
Interesting.
But you really have no idea. It could just be a really unlucky coincidence, or it could have been orchestrated by the cult for the whole time. And I think the reason I think that is because I've watched Hereditary, and that is what happened. Yeah. So I don't know if I'm just superimposing that logic, but I'm not as much of a fan of that moment as I am the It Follows or Inception ones. But
Sure.
that's just me. I don't
No.
think it's necessarily a
No, I know what you mean, but I think it also, what it also does is brilliantly set up the tone that Florence Pugh's character has to then adopt for the whole of the film.
Yeah.
Which it's a perfect opening scene. I agree with everything you're saying. It looks fantastic. It's not, like you say, a jump scary horror. It's more of a twisted psychological job, and I really love it. I would have had it in my top 3. In all honesty, were it not for the fact that I worried you would pick it as well. And I also think that one of the problems with Midsummer for me is that the character interactions are very good, but actually their cause for conflict becomes quite weak. And I think the reason that is it's probably because they're in an environment where everything's heightened and they're surrounded by strange ways and people and that kind of thing, so everything seems more like a big deal. But the idea of a thesis paper causing this much tension and all that kind of stuff. And there are a couple of dumb decisions in this film. Will Poulter's character makes a few stupid choices. But again, it's just showing their character, I suppose. But I do love this film. I think it's a great choice. I'm aware we've talked for a while, so I'm going to try and be brief on my number 1. Mine does have comedic elements in it as well as horror elements, and I think it works to its favour. My number 1 horror film is Us, written and directed by Jordan Peele. Have you seen it?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, great. So it's produced by Jason Blum and Sean McKittrick, who collaborate together on Get Out, as well as this film, and also Black Klansman, which is a brilliant film. If you haven't seen it, you definitely should. Stars Lupita Nyong'o. Unbelievable performance from Lupita Nyong'o. She's incredible in this film. Winston Duke, Shahadi Wright Joseph, and Evan Alex make up the family. Essentially, I've got a lot to say about this film, but I'm going to try and do it in a succinct way. So, the film opened on a reading stating that there are hundreds of miles of tunnels under the USA that are empty and have been left abandoned. We then see an advert of Hands Across America, which is a charity campaign from the 80s, played out on a TV where a young Adelaide watches at the Santa Cruz Pier. She wanders away from her parents and enters a fun house wherein she encounters an exact doppelganger of herself. From then, she's never the same. She doesn't speak in the same way. She doesn't act in the same way. We then see her grown up on the way to her summer home with her husband. Several years later, her husband Gabe and her 2 kids, Zora and Jason. Partway through the holiday, Gabe announces they're heading to Santa Cruz Beach. Unaware of Adelaide's past, this obviously upsets her a bit, but as it turns out, when they get there and meet with their friends, there is something strange afoot again. That evening, when they return home, a family appears on the driveway, and as they invade the home, it becomes clear that they are once again exact doppelgangers of the entire family. It's then revealed that across America, every citizen has the same problem, and their tethered selves, as they call it, are setting out to kill their Earth-dwelling counterparts. So, busy film, this one, and it's a hard film, not in the sense that it's difficult to watch because it takes you along with the ride brilliantly, but it's hard in the sense that there's a lot to unpack. So through the use of underground tunnels, rabbits and scissors, I think this is possibly the best multi-layered film I've ever seen. Not only is it my favourite horror film, it's one of my favourite films as a whole, and there's so many possible meanings to the film, but to me, the one that stands out as the most prominent is the film representing the failure of the American dream. So, there are so many links that this might take a while to explain, so let's get started. So, throughout the film, the stuff and the material is always the thing that's supposedly going to save them. Gabe focuses on food, water, backup generator, saying they've got all the things they need. He's always saying, let's get to the ambulance, let's stay here where the things are, we can protect ourselves. My favourite symbol of this is the boat. The boat is the number 1 symbol of expendable wealth in America. Most American dads, however redneck, however metropolitan, they dream of having a boat that they can go and spend some time on in the summer whenever they want. However, just like the American dream, it's faulty. It's not complete. It's only surface level. The boat pulls to the left. The motor's funny. And also, you can't just have the boat. You need all the extra stuff that goes with it. The flare gun, the vests, the rope. You always need more. And it shows that the goal in life is the stuff.
I never even thought of that.
Exactly. The goal in life is the stuff, but the stuff will always betray you. It's always hollow, it's empty, it doesn't work, and someone will always have it better than you. There are glimpses of the perfect American life all over the place, but they're all hollow. You know, it's at us, not as in us, but as in US. It's about the USA. When the tethered first break into their house, Adelaide says, "Who are you?" And her tethered says, "We're Americans." Not, "We're the tethered," not, "We're your doppelgangers," not, "We're you." She says, "We're Americans," which is a really weird response, isn't it?
It's literally the last one. I mean, you could have even said, "We're with people. That would have been more normal
Absolutely,
than we're
yeah.
Americans.
And the reason why I think this is the prevailing theme is because the film opens with a reading which could have been taken out very easily that says that there's loads of empty tunnels underneath America. America itself is surface level, and underneath it there's just empty, hollow nothing. That's why I love it. And then we see Hands Across America. Do you know much about Hands Across America?
No.
Okay, so essentially it was a charity campaign in 1986, and the idea was for 15 minutes there would be hand-holding across the whole country.
I did hear about this.
Yeah,
Yep.
to promote curing homelessness and hunger in the height of the Reagan era, which was full of 80s, tastic, Olivia Newton-John, positivity on one hand, but then blind, unchecked capitalism on the other.
Yeah.
And that event itself raised $32 million for the homeless, which was great, but the company used 17 million of that to pay out its own bills. And in a charity event, any bills outstanding over 20% are pretty egregious. So the homeless saw far less of that money than they were meant to. And again, it's the thing, it looked great on the surface, the figures were there, but there was actually, there was an evilness to it. There was a second layer, which was all about sort of self-preservation and hollowness and lack of community. I'm trying to get through this a lot because there's a lot of stuff. I've got a couple of things more which definitely back up this theory. Gabe's jumper says Howard throughout the whole film, and that's a reference to Howard University, which was a part of the Black Ivy League, which were great universities but were born out of segregation because black students weren't allowed into the major universities like Yale or Harvard, so they created their own one. So along with universities like Hampton and the Tuskegee Institute, Howard was a university with a brilliant reputation, which was born out of something so, horrible and evil. So again, it looks on the surface like this is great. Look, it's a black university where they can prosper, but it's born from this hatred across the whole country. It's born from this segregation, this racially based discrimination. One of the twins in the Tylers, she wears a t-shirt that has Black Flag on it, which is a reference to the band Black Flag. Now, in the 80s, they were a symbol of alternative, subversive spirit, counterculture, rebellion. She's a twin. She's a copy of another human being. She could not be less alternative. She's a white girl doing gymnastics on the beach. She should not be wearing a Black Flag top. But again, it's meaningless because this symbol of rebellion is on her and it doesn't fit. It's the wrong thing.
Hollow gestures.
Exactly. It's completely hollow gesture. The scissors are seen as the main weapon, but they're very rarely used to kill people. Instead, what's used to kill people is symbols of American prosperity, symbols of the upper middle class. So Gabe kills his tether with a baseball bat and the boat. A golf club is used by Zora. She kills another tethered using the expensive car. These are all symbols of wealth and materialism that are being used to essentially cause the harm. It's the stuff that's going to hurt people in the end.
Yeah. They're also golden scissors.
They are
which
also
is, like,
golden scissors.
so useless. I mean, it attests to your theory. It's why the hell do your scissors need to be gold?
Absolutely.
Basically.
That is pointless. I didn't even think about it, but that's true. It's two identical sides coming together to divide. Again, there's great symbolism all over this film. One of my favourite details, and it's really subtle actually, is when tethered Kitty kills her living Earth-dwelling counterpart. She tries surgery on herself just like Kitty had got. Kitty got a bit of plastic surgery because she wasn't happy with the way she looked. And her tethered cuts her own face open and changes something about, and then smiles in the mirror when she sees that it's changed, but then spots another imperfection and immediately goes back to being sad. And it's just like Kitty. And the point being that, it's all sort of materialistic and aesthetic. It's all appearance. It's all on the surface. It's all what's shown rather than what is. And I love how much this film is able to relate back to that, and it culminates in the final reveal, which, I mean, how did you feel watching that final scene?
Sad.
Yeah?
It's similar to how I felt in Midsummer, really. It's a rough ending.
It is a rough ending, but I love the idea that, them is us is them, we are the same. It's fantastic. The score, now, this is where I know that you're going to come into your own, because the score is genius. I got 5 on it, changed to a horror theme. It's just brilliant, isn't it?
My main point is that it could, on the surface, I could take bits of it and I could shove it into a 1980 horror film.
Yeah.
Like it uses strings. It uses a lot of cliche, fring, horror, like string stabs, like, but it for some reason it feels new. It's done at such a crazy pace. I mean, it's not like the strings are going down and then coming up. I mean, they're breakneck speed the whole time in like the breaking and entering scene. I mean, the strings are up there the whole time. It's a very new take on a very old way of doing a soundtrack. I think on the surface maybe cliche, but I think it's actually brilliantly done. I think the score first. I think it's an awesome, very traditional, but very.
And that
new,
scene where Zora and Jason are going about the house trying to kill the tethered of the Tylers with F the Police by NWA playing in the background. Oh, that's top tier. I love it. Yeah. I think Lupita Nyong'o should have been in the Oscar nominees for this year. She wasn't even there. She wasn't even close, which is an outrage. Peele's writing is just incredible. There's so many sort of references, like there's things, like we were talking about before about those videos that say, 30 things you missed or whatever. There's stuff on the bookshelves which has got 11s written all over it, as in, twins of each other. The preacher holds a sign which has Jeremiah 11:11 in it. It's full of brilliant symbolism and it looks great. It's brilliantly creepy. It's funny as well. Like most of what Winston Duke says is really, really funny, and it feels like Jordan Peele comes through.
Yeah, I mean the F the Police scene is inherently funny. I mean, from my memory, there's the song playing. These two kids look at some dead bodies. They shrug to each other. I mean, that's comedic, and then it goes straight into another battle. But it's weird because another part of the sound is that it sounds, at parts anyway, it sounds like I recorded it on my iPhone.
Yes,
because like from memory, it sounds like it's coming from a radio on the other side of the room. And you're hearing all these pots and pans clashing. You can hear them walking. Yeah, it brings you in. It's very immersive. It's very, very well done and immersive audio. And also something that I forgot to mention with Hereditary, it pans stuff to the left and right extremes, which is something people are doing a lot more with horror films. They're very scared to. In theatres, you don't want to pan stuff to the left and right because obviously it means some audience members will get left out of some sounds.
Yes,
but
of course.
Film Us and Hereditary did it deliberately because it makes you feel like you're in a more natural environment. Some sounds will be more far away from you than others. It won't always be equidistant.
Good. Well, I think that's been 6 films comprehensively covered there. I'm glad we didn't have any overlap because I think we've talked about some really different films. Us is a completely different film to 10 Cloverfield Lane, and It Follows is a completely different film to Midsommar. I think what we've managed to do is obviously avoid the elephant in the room by picking something like The Nun or any of the Annabelle films, because I think that's the kind of the reason why horror gets overlooked, is because people see all this crap being shoveled out for a quick buck. I mean, I constantly see adverts going, from acclaimed director James Wan, and I'm like, what, the guy that made The Nun? I don't care. Come on. Yep.
And it always... the annoying thing is, though, it always does so well in media. Yeah. The media hypes it up so much in, like, pre-release, scariest film of the year, and it's not. Yeah.
Do you know, there's a case to say that the Conjuring films absolutely, legally, shouldn't exist. And the reason there's a case to say that is because at the start of all of them, they say these are based on real events. Now, actually, legitimately, that's fine, what they say, because they are based on the testimonies of the people that Ed and Lorraine Warren worked with and their own diaries themselves. So theoretically, you can say that these are based on true events if you believe them. But they were proved to be frauds so many times. Can we move away from these people who are blatantly making things up?
Yeah. No. Well, maybe we can start a campaign to get them taken down.
Maybe we can. Two boys from England try and take on Blumhouse Productions.
Yep, we got this.
Well, thank you very much for joining me, Roddy. I've had a wonderful time discussing films, and I would love to have you on again at some point if you're interested.
Yeah, it's been all right.
All right?
I probably won't. I probably won't ever come back.
Right, well, you've been listening to me and nobody else in this podcast.
No, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for inviting me on. I've really, really enjoyed speaking with you. And I also think you have some incredibly just like new takes that I hadn't even thought of. For some reason, and it seems blindingly obvious now, I hadn't even thought of the material wealth in Us and
Right.
things like that. Like, yeah, it's been very, very interesting. And thank you for having me on.
Well, you're very welcome, and I'm glad I could provide something new with these films to you. You've definitely done the same for me with stuff like It Follows, so thank you very much. As always, if you do have anything that you would like to ask about, or any feedback, any criticism, anything you want to see differently, or anything you want to be brought in, do let me know at BridgeOriadom on Twitter, because someone else managed to take the name. Roddy, where can people find you if they want to get in touch?
Roddy C456, because Roddy C123 was banned. On Instagram, that is.
Got you. Okay. Well, thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoy the rest of your week, and I will see you later. Bye!